47th Invocation of the Litany of the Blessed Virgin, Queen of Patriarchs, pray for us. Upon earth the holy patriarchs had beheld afar off and saluted with a lively faith a sweet and firm hope, that wonderful woman whom the Lord had announced from the beginning as being one day to give birth to the Savior of the world. In heaven they offer to her with unequal joy the tribute of their veneration and tender love, as to her who through Jesus introduced them into the everlasting dwellings. O Mary, sweet hope of the patriarchs, who didst possess in so intimate a manner him who was their desire, make us appreciate the infinite happiness that we enjoy in possessing him ourselves, together with all the graces of which he is the inexhaustible source. The patriarchs were objects of God's special favor. He made them many promises of protection and assistance, all of which he most munificently fulfilled. God bestowed upon the patriarchs a threefold grace. He frequently appeared to them and assured them of his protection and love. He promised to make them the fathers of a numerous posterity, and to give them the beautiful land of Canaan for an inheritance. And he announced to them that from their posterity the Redeemer of the world would come forth. Who does not see at the first glance that the graces which Mary in this threefold relation has received are infinitely greater than that she is, therefore justly called Queen of the Patriarchs? God only appeared to the patriarchs and conversed with them, but of Mary he assumed human nature, lived with her for 30 years, and manifested towards her that filial obedience rendered by any good son to a loving mother. It was Mary alone to whom was given the rare privilege of calling the Son of God her Son. It was she who carried him in her arms, who caressed and fondled him. It was she who shared with him the combined pleasures and sorrows of 33 years, who stood beneath the cross on which he immolated himself for the salvation of the world, and who received him to her bosom after all was consummated upon that cross. Finally, it was she who saw him again after his resurrection, and was assumed by him into heaven, where she now reigns with him for all eternity. Oh, how far Mary surpasses the patriarchs of the old law! Moreover, the patriarchs were only the progenitors of one nation, of one country. The land of Canaan was promised to them as an inheritance. But Mary, as the mother of the Redeemer, is the mother of all the nations of the world, especially of all Catholics, whose number amounts to over 200 millions. Again, the patriarchs were only the ancestors of him through whom all the nations of the earth were to be blessed. But Mary is the mother of Jesus Christ, the promised Redeemer, through whom the whole human race received grace and salvation. What more convincing proof could we have that Mary stands high above the patriarchs, and that she is with justice saluted as their queen? My dear Christian, these venerable servants of God are delighted to acknowledge that through Mary the crown of glory encircles their brows. What has merited for them such an inestimable crown? Their fidelity to God, their faith in a Redeemer to come, and their desire to see the day of his coming shine forth. Fidelity, faith, desire, which in the heart of the Holy Virgin, before the happy message which she received from above, had already risen to a degree of perfection inexpressible. If these just men burned with the desire to see the Redeemer, if the faith and fidelity of Abraham, for example, had become so ardent, if the wish to see Jesus come down on earth had grown so intense in his heart that Jesus praised him solemnly for it at Jerusalem, how great must have been the flame of the same desire in the soul of her of whom St. Proclus has said that no patriarch can in any way be compared to her. The patriarchs were men according to God's own heart, who with constancy walked in the path of justice, and made it the first and most important rule of their life to do the will of God in all things. Three virtues in particular shone like glittering stars in the life of the patriarchs. In Abraham, it was faith. In Isaac, obedience. In Jacob, patience. How admirable was the faith of Abraham! God had promised to make him the father of a great nation, but Abraham could reckon on no posterity, for Sarah, his wife, was far advanced in years, naturally past the age of childbearing, and was barren. Had he not every reason to doubt the promise of God? Yet he doubted not, but believed. Still more, after Sarah had borne a son, and he had attained the age of boyhood, God commanded Abraham, "Take thy only begotten son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and go into the land of vision, and there thou shalt offer him for a holocaust upon one of the mountains which I will show thee." What a command! How could Abraham banish the thought, if I offer my only son for a holocaust, how can I, as God has promised me, become the father of a great people and of the Redeemer? Truly, this promise can never be fulfilled. Were these his thoughts? No, his faith was unshaken. He said to himself, God can make to me children out of stones, and he was therefore ready to sacrifice his son, and would have immolated him had not God restrained him by an angel. This certainly was faith worthy of all praise, because he believed and hoped against hope. Behold the obedience of his son Isaac. Abraham commands him to accompany him on his sacrificial journey. Isaac obeys, and at the foot of the mountain his father lays the wood necessary for the holocaust upon his shoulders. Isaac accepts the burden without a murmur. His father, after having erected an altar upon Mount Moriah, announces to him that he is to be the victim for the holocaust, and Isaac does not refuse, but obeys. Meek and patient as a lamb, he is bound and laid upon the altar, and quietly awaits the fatal stab from his father's hand. Is not this obedience most extraordinary? Finally, consider the eminent degree of patience to which Jacob attained. How much had he not to endure from his cruel brother Esau, who even sought his life? How many tribulations and hardships did he not suffer during the 20 years that he spent in the service of Laban? And later on his patience might have faltered at the severest test to which he was put, when his sons told him that his beloved Joseph had been devoured by a wild beast. But he remained patient and resigned to God under all difficulties, and trusted always to God, who delivered him from every tribulation. Mary must possess all these virtues of the patriarchs in a more eminent degree, that we may be able to salute her as the Queen of Patriarchs. Is this really the case? Yes. For St. Bernard says, there is no virtue with which Mary is not adorned. All that the saints had individually, she has collectively, and every virtue which is common in others, she possesses in an extraordinary degree. She possessed the faith of Abraham, but in a far greater measure than he. She had more faith than all men and angels, for when Gabriel announced to her the adorable mystery of the incarnation of the Son of God, and told her that she would become the mother of God without ceasing to be a pure, immaculate virgin, not a shadow of doubt entered her mind. She believed this great, incomprehensible mystery upon the word of the angel. Oh, how truly could Elizabeth say to her, "Blessed art thou that hast believed." Mary possessed the obedience of Isaac in a more eminent degree than that holy patriarch. Scarcely has she learned the will of the Most High, that she should become the mother of God, when, being fully resigned, though she is not ignorant of the sufferings and tribulations connected with this dignity, she says, "Behold, the handmaid of the Lord, be it done to me according to thy word." But still more praiseworthy does her obedience appear on Calvary, where she voluntarily delivers her Son to death for the redemption of the world. She possessed patience in a more eminent degree than did Jacob. I consider it superfluous to add further proofs, because the whole life of Mary was a continual practice of patience, for she suffered without interruption. The patience she maintained during all the sufferings of her Son, from the manger to the cross, was alone sufficient to render her a martyr of patience. Wherefore St. Bonaventure could say of her, "The crucified conceive the crucified." Thus, Mary, by the splendor of her virtues, excels all the patriarchs of the old law, and is justly styled Queen of Patriarchs. My dear Christian, follow in the footsteps of the patriarchs, and especially of Mary, the Queen of Patriarchs, and endeavor to lead a virtuous life. In order to convince yourself of the necessity of faith, frequently consider the words of Christ, "He that believeth not shall be condemned." Do not compromise with faith. A partial faith is not sufficient. You must accept the entire faith, such as the Catholic Church teaches, if you wish to be saved. Often make acts of faith, especially when you are assailed by doubts, and meditate on the individual truths of faith in order to strengthen yourself in the way of godliness. Practice obedience, first to God by doing His holy will in all things, obedience to the Church by scrupulously fulfilling her rules and regulations, obedience to your superiors by cheerfully doing their bidding. Examine yourself and see where and in what points you have been disobedient, and correct your faults. Practice patience. Bear the sufferings of this life and the hardships incident to your state without murmuring or complaining, for the love of God. For patience is necessary for you, that doing the will of God you may receive the promise. If you are always patient, you can become a martyr without the sword, as St. Gregory observes. Think of the causes of your past impatience, and of the means which you must employ in order not to lose patience, and in your patience possess your soul. The patriarchs enjoyed the favor of God on account of their piety, and on various occasions was pleased to listen graciously to their prayers. God, who several times appeared to Abraham, once revealed to him that he would destroy the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah because of their vices. Abraham interceded for them and implored the Lord to spare them if 50 just could be found. God granted his petition, whereupon Abraham continued to plead with God till he reduced the number of just to 10. Had those wicked cities been able to present even 10 good men to appease the divine justice, God would have spared them because of Abraham's intercession. So much did this pious patriarch avail with God. Of Jacob, we also read that God blessed Laban for his sake. "Thou knowest how I have served thee, and how great thy possession hath been in my hands. Thou hadst but little before I came to thee, and now thou art become rich, and the Lord hath blessed thee at my coming." But God takes pleasure, greater pleasure, in Mary than in the patriarchs, for she is holier than they, and is more intimately united with him than they, because she is his mother. There is therefore no doubt that she avails more with God than do the patriarchs. She is the channel through which all graces are conveyed to us. She is all-powerful through her intercession, because she obtains all that she asks. Hence, St. Anselm exclaims, "What thou dost desire, O Virgin, cannot remain undone. If thou dost only will, all is effected." An event which occurred on December 19, 1857, is an evident proof of this truth. A young Parisian of good family had, like many others, in the enjoyment of pleasures and in dissipations of every description, lost his faith. Abandoned by his parents, upon whose loving hearts he had inflicted repeated wounds, and destitute of all means of support, he obtained a situation as teacher in a public school. But his offensive and scandalous conduct soon attracted the attention of his superiors, who ignominiously dismissed him. From that moment, his licentiousness knew no bounds. His debaucheries, however, soon brought him to a most miserable condition. Tired of life and on the point of despair, he resolved to drown himself. He went to the banks of the Seine and was in the act of taking the final leap, the fatal leap, when he heard the cry, "Look out! Look out!" This cry came from some boatmen who were putting their ropes in order and whom in his agitation he had not observed. He went higher up the river, seeking a more secluded place where he might accomplish his wicked design. Meanwhile the thought arose in his heart and persistently refused to be banished. In half an hour they will draw out my lifeless body, and where will my soul be? He stopped, reflected a few moments, returned into the city, and entered a street, walking on he knew not whither. Having arrived at the end of the street, he looked up and found himself before the door of the Church of Our Lady of Victories. Instinctively he entered, and exhausted from fatigue and nervous excitement, sat down near the pulpit. It was the hour of twilight. He was alone, and not a sound disturbed the holy quiet of the place. The lamps that were perpetually burning before the miraculous statue of the Blessed Virgin attracted the attention of the unfortunate young man. Suddenly he noticed the image of Mary, and at the sight the most singular sensation took possession of his heart. He sprang up and fled in the most precipitate haste, as if he wished to escape from the hands of an enemy. The whole night he was tormented by an indescribable feeling of terror, and not being able to account for it, he resolved to return in the morning to the same church. True to his resolution, day had scarcely dawned than he went to this sanctuary, whither he felt himself drawn by an irresistible power. Entering, his eyes voluntarily sought the image of Mary, at whose feet the venerable pastor, Father Designet, was kneeling. He approached and said to him in a loud voice, "Reverend Father." The priest turned and asked, "What do you wish, sir?" "Really, I do not know why I have called you," the unhappy man replied. "Be assured, however, it was not for the purpose of making a confession to you." The good pastor, in a reassuring tone, said to him, "It is of no consequence, but you seem very sad. What troubles you?" "Ah, yes, I am very sad, sir. I am really very unhappy. I passed this church yesterday and entered. I intended to come again, and as I find you here, I must explain to you my feelings." Grace triumphed here. The Blessed Virgin had snatched from despair and crime a soul that seemed eternally lost. The venerable pastor listened to the vivid description which the young man gave of his feelings, when suddenly he saw him burst into tears and fall on his knees, begging him to hear his confession. From that happy moment a thorough change took place in the heart of the unfortunate man. The new Saul became even a chosen vessel of election. The infinite mercy of God called him to the priesthood and the apostolate. He whose wonderful conversion I've just now related is a priest and a missionary, and has gone forth to far distant lands to seek the glory of martyrdom among the savages to whom he is preaching the gospel. My dear Christian, desire nothing so much as to preserve the grace of God. If you do so, you are more blessed than if you possess the favor of all the potentates of the world. For God's grace infuses true peace into your heart and renders you happy for time and eternity. You can also do a great deal of good for your fellow men when you're in the state of grace, for God's blessing will attend you in all your undertakings. How much do we owe to the saints, those friends of God? For their sake he has compassion on the world. For their sake he withholds his chastisements. For their sake He overwhelms mankind with benefits and graces of every description. What an encouragement for you to strive incessantly to acquire and preserve the friendship of God. But because he bestows his favor only on truly pious souls who consecrate themselves to him without reserve, mortify all inordinate love of the world and of self, and love God with your whole heart.